When you write your content, who are you writing for? It's an important question to answer. You need to have someone in mind when you write. But there's another audience you should have. The robots. Specifically, search engines. If you're not writing for both, you could be missing out on traffic, signups, and sales. Luckily, Maddy Osman and her new book, Writing for Humans and Robots, is here to help. This is episode 272. You can find all of the links, including a link to Maddy's book, over at howibuilit.it/272. Thanks to today's sponsors. They are Nexus, LearnDash, and Text Expander. You'll hear about them more later on in the show. But for now, let's get on to the intro and then the interview. Hey, everybody, and welcome to How I Built It, the podcast that helps small business owners create engaging content that drives sales. Each week, I talk about how you can build good content faster to increase revenue and establish yourself as an authority. I'm your host, Joe Casabona. Now let's get to it. All right, I am here with Maddy Osman, founder of the Blogsmith and author of the upcoming book, Writing for Humans and Robots, The New Rules of Content Style. Maddy's a good friend of mine. We were in a mastermind group for a while, and she's been on the show before talking about getting gigs on Fiverr. This is much more in her wheelhouse, though. So I feel like that last episode, I'll link it in the show notes, but that was like a favor to me. This is repaying that favor. Maddy, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for reaching out and giving me this opportunity to chat about something I've been spending a lot of time on.
Yeah. So you started writing this like was this a NaNoWriMo production, right? This is like a couple of NaNoWriMos ago.
It was, yeah. So I think it was NaNoWriMo of November 2020. And it kind of sat around for a bit because I was in limbo about my pandemic wedding. And then that kind of became a thing again when I planned the reception. And I just figured, I'm not going to have the brain power to finish this until I just get that done.
Yeah. Now, I've tried and failed many NaNoWriMo before. That's not to say like I'm like a multiply published author. No, self-published once, half-assed. And I'll probably self-publish again, but so it's not that I don't have the capacity to write a book, but I feel like if I'm left to my own devices, right, which is like, oh, NaNoWriMo, I show up every day myself, right? It's pretty easy to get busy. And with 3 kids, well, I guess it was just 2 kids at that point. I did start writing a book in the last NaNoWriMo. So what was it like? Like what kind of discipline did you need for writing for NaNoWriMo? And does their support system help? Because like maybe that was my problem. I just didn't take advantage of their own support.
Yeah, so I think normally pre-pandemic, NaNoWriMo typically has city hubs and like groups where you could actually physically go in, do your writing, go to like a library or something.
Cool.
And obviously that wasn't the case in 2020. They have like a forum type thing through their website. And then I think they also have a Discord channel. So you can kind of just pop in and be like, this is me kind of checking in. Here's what I'm working on today. And that's the camaraderie of just existing in that virtual space together. I didn't end up interacting much with their forum or chats or anything like that. They also have there's a subreddit for NaNoWriMo and kind of the same thing. But what I did was more using Twitter and using the NaNoWriMo hashtag and kind of following along with other people's projects while also sharing my progress. And so I think what it comes down to is that everybody gets that accountability different. One of those things isn't going to work for everyone, but there are many different communities. And so you just have to find the one that you're most excited about or that you're most, willing to participate in. And so that kept me going to kind of like announce my intent, and then to share what I was doing every day. That convinced me, I think, to just like keep doing it and keep sharing.
That's awesome. And finding value in Twitter too. I know that in our mastermind group, we discussed my massive disdain for Twitter. But I have been using it more effective lately. More effectively. That's too many adverbs. Anyway, I've been doing better.
It could work.
It could work. Yeah. Right. I've been doing better at it lately. A couple of weeks ago, as people are hearing this, I interviewed Jay Klaus, talking about Tweet 100, which was kind of the thing that made me use Twitter more effectively, because that legitimately did gain me a lot of followers, relative to the number I usually gain. And so I've backpedaled a little bit. I heavily filter Twitter, but finding the right communities, and especially because they have that community tab now. Twitter can be super effective.
Good rules in place to
I
make
sure
it manageable.
Yes. I'm always afraid to share. Like I accidentally like shared my like Twitter mute terms before, like in a live stream. And I was like, oh man, because I just feel like I'm going to get yelled at. Like, how could you mute this thing that I care about?
Right.
But no,
it's personal.
Yeah. You should know, listeners, I'm an equal. It's not a single cause or anything. It's just things I'm sick of hearing about on Twitter. I think that's the important part, right? I don't care about people's hot takes about whatever. I want like actual experts talking about it so that I'm informed, and not just like what this person thought at 3 a.m. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about your book. Oh, the other thing I want to talk to you about, or mention about NaNoWriMo, is it feels like it's mostly geared towards fiction. Is that okay? Because in your book is nonfiction, my book was nonfiction, or all of my books are nonfiction, I guess. Did it make it harder to use their resources because of that?
I mean, it's definitely different, right? Like it's going a little bit against the grain of like what their sort of like online logging tool is meant for, kind of what the community stands for.
Right, because like they have like the who's your main character or whatever, and I'm like the reader. Like I guess I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
A business owner.
Yeah, right. Cool. So maybe that's an interesting exercise to try though. Maybe that'll be like one of my YouTube videos. It'll be like, I'm going to try to fit this nonfiction book into a fiction box or whatever.
Right.
Awesome. So let's dive in to the book. We're going to dive specifically into one chapter in a minute. And then you can really, listeners, see the kind of value you're going to get. But I want to talk more generally about how you came up with this idea first.
Totally. So the initial idea came from the fact that I knew I wanted to write a book. And then during the pandemic, we all had some extra time, I think, that was usually spent outside of our houses.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to find ways to keep ourselves entertained in our houses. And so I was like, okay, so I have this time. I know I want to do something. What exactly do I want to do? And it was, I think, around the same time I had developed a style guide for the Blogsmith for our writers and for our editors. It was at a time where the team was starting to expand beyond me and maybe like one or two other writers. It was growing. And so I needed some sort of tool to be able to consistently grow my team without sacrificing quality, without, creating a lot of edits. Because as you grow, if you have problems, those problems just become larger if you don't have a plan for how to deal with them. And so, I'm thinking about this style guide. I'm thinking it's already pretty long. It's like 20 pages long. It's no small thing, but I thought that what it was missing was some helpful context and examples, and not just like sharing a rule of style, like you should write headings this way, but to give the context of like, don't do this, here's why. Do this, here's why, just to kind of like to make it something that somebody could actually apply to their writing versus like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So
it's almost like how in like the brand guidelines, like they'll show like proper use of a logo and then they'll have like
right,
poor use of a logo with like an X over it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to come up with those examples if you don't have prior experience, or if you're new to the team, or if you're new to writing for a certain client or something like that. So yeah, I think I went into NaNoWriMo thinking I'm just going to expand this style guide and kind of see where that goes. And so at the end of what is it, 30 days? Is it 31 days in November?
30 days take
30 days
November, April,
September,
June,
and November.
Yeah, right. April, June, and November. We got there. It's 30 days. Yeah.
So every NaNoWriMo, there's 30 days to write 50,000 words. We've established.
Perfect.
And so at the end of those 30 days, I had however many chapters. Some of them I spent multiple days on. Some of them it was one day, or maybe there were days where I did 2 chapters at a time because they were short. And it just like it didn't have a coherent structure yet. It was kind of still like just a bunch of related things, but it wasn't until I did a round of professional edits. I also had my mom proofread to add sort of like the industry outsider perspective and like, do these words make sense?
Yeah. And your mom teaches English or
she did.
Okay.
She did.
Yeah.
So she was an English teacher for many years. And then, she like ruthlessly corrects my grammar as I speak. So she was a great person to nitpick the details. But yeah, it wasn't until I completed, honestly, a few rounds of edits that I was like, okay, so like these things go together, these things go together. And that's then where the sort of like writing for humans and robots came together for me, because it was like this stuff, like, that's just for the human. This stuff, it's kind of about both of them,
This episode is brought to you by Text Expander. What can you do with more hours? Repetitive typing, little mistakes, searching for answers. They're all taking precious time away from you. With Text Expander, you can take it back and focus on what matters most. In 2021, Text Expander saved me 34 typing hours. That doesn't even include the collective hours I would have spent looking for responses, links, resources, code, and anything else I type regularly. Talk about creating more efficiently. You will never need to copy-paste repetitive responses again. With Text Expander, your knowledge will always be at your fingertips with a quick search or abbreviation. Text Expander is available on all platforms, and show listeners get 20% off. Take back your time today at textexpander.com/podcast. So it sounds like the story kind of came after you had this skeleton of a style guide.
Right.
Did you outline it all? Like, I know I overcomplicate my process, but like I will like mind map, especially like with my HTML book, because like HTML and CSS is like such such a vast thing that I'm like, okay, I'm writing a book for people who've never written HTML and CSS before. What do I cover? What don't I?
Things.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Did you do something similar? What was your brainstorming process like? I don't want to put it in like a mind map box. Yeah.
Mind maps are great, and I would say it's however you outline, it's going to be similar to that. Just kind of throwing ideas onto the screen, trying to make connections. Figuring out what the end goal is, obviously. So I think what I did was I really just took that style guide that I had and kind of broke it down into like, okay, so these concepts kind of go together. Like that's a chapter. Maybe I'll talk about this. Maybe this is too much information, or maybe that's not relevant to a book, or maybe that's just Blogsmith specific. So let's axe that, So the outlining stage was just kind of translating the style guide into like sections, and then essentially taking those and then expanding them during the draft. So I made it was pretty easy because I already had that at least foundation. And I would say that if I were to do NaNoWriMo again, I would absolutely need an outline, because I think it's hard to show up every day if you don't know what you're going to work on, or if you don't even have like options, because there were some chapters where I'm just like, oh, this is like just going to be hard to explain. It's like one of those, I'm sure you get it all the time with like the HTML and CSS and all. It's just like there's some things you're like, I get it. It's like hard to explain though,
Right. And, I mean, especially depending on who you're writing for. Like, like, is it for a beginner? How much context do I need to provide?
Right.
Is
exactly.
it
just
someone
like
advanced?
Through that.
Yeah. It's hard.
And
I mean, teaching is hard.
It really is. And so, some days it's like my brain doesn't have the capacity to write about X technical subject, but maybe I could work on the chapter about images, which is kind of fun,
Yeah, that's so funny, because I have to write my books linearly, like, or my courses. Right? Like,
Makes sense.
I don't write courses or books out of order, because I feel like, and I know people who do, right? Like, your approach is probably a good one, especially if you have writer's block. Like, and maybe I've done it before, because like I've had chapters where like it was like kind of like discrete topics that like were kind of set apart from everything else. But
sure,
if I reference something, I want to make sure it's already written, right? I don't want to like say in chapter 7.
That's part of it.
Yeah, right. And I guess that's where like the proofreaders come in and stuff like that. But depending on the process, they're like proofing chapters separately, right? They're not reading the whole book through once, most likely.
So. Yeah, typically, especially if it's not in that final order. But I will say that when I had my team go through and do edits, which actually like really, that was probably the edit that most shaped the book, was when the people who like use Blogsmith style every day actually went in and, clarified things or added context or challenged things. That's definitely where it became the best. But I'm trying to think of what I was trying to say.
Referencing.
Continuity.
Yes. Yeah.
So like we did an edit at the very end throughout, but then again at the end, just to be like, is this the first mention of a concept? Have we defined it? Does it make sense in this order? Because we changed the order after the initial edits. And so, it was totally possible that some things like did not make sense in the new order. So, I mean, I think that's an important edit to go through no matter what, but especially if you're going to be rearranging things after the fact, because it's very likely that you missed something.
Yeah. And I should make clear that I actually don't know like how my book was proofread. We'll talk about this in Build Something More. But this is a self-published book that Maddy has written. I have self-published once, but my self-published was like basically like a bunch of articles put together. And so we'll talk the differences in process there. If you want to get an ad-free extended version of this conversation, head over to the show notes, howibuilt.it/272. You'll see a sign up there. You'll also see a link to Maddy's book, which you can pre-order now. And you'll hear kind of Maddy's approach to self-publishing and going through all of the edits herself versus my experience, which was through a book publisher who had a team put in place. So again, that's howibuilt.it/272. But yeah, I don't really know. I know that my book had like 4 or 5 editors. I had one point of contact who would read the chapter and as I handed it to him, and then he'd send it to a technical editor to make sure everything was like code correct. And this guy must have had like the HTML spec like memorized, because he'd be like, well, that's not right. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm self-taught. So I'm grateful for
it's right for me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But then I suspect like as the book actually came together, the other editors would read it like more in order to make sure like if I had an acronym, right? Like you said, I spelled it out first and then used the acronym or whatever. The biggest continuity for me. Yeah. So
I was just going to say, I think that like technical aspect is really important for a nonfiction book. Like in my book, obviously I'm talking about some things about SEO. And so it's like, I don't want to make a claim that like, I don't believe, or that is like something that's easy for somebody to disprove, you know? And it's hard because there are so many, what's the opposite of absolute? Relative. There's so many relativities.
Subjective. Yeah. Like subjective views.
Subjective.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's like anytime I made a claim, like have to have a citation, like, oh, I oversighted everything.
Yeah, you know, I did the same thing, and then my editor was like, "This is not an academic paper. You're the expert." But the thing that informed that was my very first book that I published was called like Building WordPress Themes from Scratch, and I mentioned a technique that was like persona non grata by the time the book came out.
Oh,
and people
no.
were like, how could you tell people to, it was like using query posts or something like that. It was like something that early on we decided you're not supposed to do. And it was like in the book. And I was like, man, never again. Like I will always make sure now that I'm doing the right thing. So like, yeah, it's like scary, right? When you're putting something to page, you can't just update the page of a book that's been printed. Like you can have the errata section, but
right. It's not like a blog, which is what I'm more used to. So it's definitely an adjustment.
Yeah. Awesome. So the book came together. We'll talk about the self-publishing process and build something more. Why don't we go through and outline so people can kind of get an idea of everything that's around the main chapter we'll talk about. So
Sure.
this is broken down into two sections, right? Writing for humans.
Three.
Technically
but
three.
Yes, like two main ones, yeah.
Yeah. So we're writing for humans, we're writing for robots, and then I guess we're like kind of combining it.
Putting it all together.
Yeah. And so I have the book up here. I got an advanced copy, which makes me feel really good as a podcaster and hashtag influencer. Hashtag. But I mean, there's like 22 chapters in this. You know, it's a weighty book.
I have the proof, not the like for reals, but it's like it's got some meat.
Look at that. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, that's like this is another thing. My publisher is always like, you need to write more words. And I'm like, but I don't think I need more words. Like, I'm writing the minimum number of words to communicate the concept. And they're like, but we need this to be a certain amount of pages to sell it at the price we want to sell it at. And I'm like, fine. Just a really funny insight into that. But okay, so part one, writing for humans. Give us like a 10,000 foot overview of this section. What is writing for humans?
Yeah, I think writing for humans is just appealing to the person that could actually like make a purchase. You know, the person who stands to either benefit from your content or for you to benefit from them reading your content. So it's all about things like being thoughtful with word choice so that you're not unintentionally alienating them. It's about things like how to use numbers in a consistent way, because without having rules around how you use them, it's really easy to get like 10 different things. And then, you know, if you're, for example, writing for a specific client and, you know, you have multiple writers writing for that client and the stuff doesn't look the same, then it just doesn't make you look good.
Yeah.
It's about things like formatting, you know, using lists, how you, I don't know if this is in the humans or the robots chapter, but how to use links, you know, like the anchor text, even like things like, you know, being careful about extra stuff at the end of the link, like UTM tags or whatever. You know, they may not be necessary because you know, you probably have a different campaign than the person who originally shared that link.
Right.
And then, the last big thing in that section, I think, is visuals, because there's some crossover with like how a robot would process that visual, but ultimately, you know, it's for that human reader and to engage them and keep them interested in reading what you put together.
Yeah, that's really cool. And so I like that you explicitly mentioned numbers because this is always something I struggle with. Like, I think the rule of thumb that I learned was like, I think up to 6 or 7, you're supposed to write the number out like in letters.
It's something like under 10, I think.
Okay, is it under 10? I wasn't sure, but like, yeah, up to a certain number.
I think that's AP styles. Yeah.
Okay.
Specifically, so it could be different with Chicago, for example.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, that's always interesting to me, and I'm like, I wonder why. But then, like, I guess in certain contexts, right? If you're talking about like math, right? You're not going to write like TEN plus 7, like 1 7 or whatever. Like, so that's I just think it's really interesting that Grammarly always corrects me with that. I paid for Grammarly for a quarter.
That chapter was probably one of the more boring ones to write, but also like one of the more necessary for my team because, it's also like talking about things like using symbols. Like some brands that I've worked with want to use the percent sign. Some of them want to spell it out. And it's like, in order to be consistent with that so that they're not constantly telling me like, hey, Maddy, like, why did you do it this way when we already told you we want it this way? Like, that's why it's important to have a style guide and to define those rules. It just helps you look like more of a professional, and it saves your clients time on making those silly edits.
This episode is brought to you by Store Builder from Nexus. When it comes to setting up an e-commerce site, you have a choice between easy but limited or a limitless platform that you need to manage yourself. Until now. Store Builder is e-commerce made easy for everybody. It saves you time and delivers a storefront that lets you get to selling. As someone who set up multiple e-commerce sites, I can tell you that Store Builder has been a much easier experience than anything else. Answer a few questions, add your content, and sell. Store Builder was created and is supported by e-commerce experts at Nexus. Get the speed, security, and support you need when you need it. Are you ready to launch your perfect online store? Head over to howibuilt.it/storebuilder for a special offer. That's howibuilt.it/storebuilder. So let's go on a quick side quest here. Do you have a different style guide for each client, or do you have like your base style guide and then you make adjustments based on the client's preferences? That's
more of what it is. Okay. Some clients are very specific. And so, yeah, like if they have a detailed style guide, we're probably just going to go with that. And then the writers know Blogsmith style for whatever isn't explicitly defined. Mm-hmm. But yeah, for the most part, it's just making adjustments and kind of saying like, here's where that rule differs from ours.
Nice. And so what's interesting about this and that book, right, is like you mentioned like that was a boring chapter to write. Again, just like in my last book, like, kind of the whatever, how to use an FTP program is like not, I mean, HTML is not like a page turner, right? It's like I wrote a textbook. But this could really serve as a resource not only for content creators like myself and the listeners, but for agencies who might need to put together their own style guide, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the hope ultimately is that people will use this to create their own rules. And, they don't have to look exactly like mine, but as long as you're defining them and sharing them with whoever's involved in that process, the goal is ultimately to save everybody time and effort.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so the writing for robots section, by robots, you basically mean, I won't explicitly name any search engine, but search engines, right?
Yes, exactly. So any sort of like robotic entity that would be indexing and then serving up your content to that end user, and mostly search engine spiders. But what's kind of interesting too is now we have all these like AI tools, especially in the world of writing. And so it's just interesting to maybe put yourself in the perspective of like how these robots quote unquote think, how they process information and even how much more sophisticated they're getting as search engines refine their algorithms.
Yeah, that's another kind of interesting thing to think about. Have you used any AI tools to like write any content for yourself? We'll say, I don't want to put your agency on blast here, but have you tried any?
Sure. We've definitely tried them. I would say more for like components of the creation process, whether that's like headline generation ideas or even like an initial outline. We use 2 AI, or maybe they're more machine learning, or maybe it's a combo, tools right now for like the briefing process, and then kind of for the final content optimization process. I think you're familiar with them. ClearScope is one, and then Phrase is another. And so the way that those work is more kind of just like scraping Google data and then presenting it to you in a way that you can act on it, versus like creating an outline or something like that. But it's the idea that it's saving us doing all that research, giving us like an early win kind of.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've always been kind of suspect of them. I tried AnyWord, full disclosure, AnyWord paid me for a review on my YouTube channel. And I gave it a try, and I was actually like surprised. Like, I mean, the main content was like whatever, but like the headlines, right? Like, I think it was like ideas for how to make money with your podcast, and there were a couple that I didn't think of like immediately, like selling merch or whatever. And I thought that was really impressive. And so, if nothing else, it gave me like an outline to work from, which I thought was pretty cool.
I think that's the main use case of them right now. It's to sort of assist you. It shouldn't replace like your own human ingenuity or, your own human emotions, like whatever it is about you that connects with other people. But it's interesting. Right before this, I was on Twitter and I saw that somebody had done like an experiment where they had published like 30,000 AI written articles. And he said like only a very small percentage of them ever got indexed. And then, they hit their peak rank, but now are going downhill. Yeah. And he's like, if I want to improve that, I'm going to have to totally rewrite these articles. So at this point, like Google has come out and said that any AI generated content is not something that, if they know that that's what it is, that they're going to rank. So
right, and like some
to think about.
Yeah, and like some of these tools like are basically lifting paragraphs. Well, from what I understand, from what people have told me, right, these tools can sometimes lift straight paragraphs from other blog posts, right? Yeah. Plus, like an AI can't tell a story from your personal life. I just wrote a blog post today about like how the eye doctor, my optometrist, got an extra $40 out of me, and I happily paid it because I didn't want to get dilated, because that's like 4 to 6 hours out of my workday that I lose, right? And they're like, well, for $39, we can just do like a photo of the back of your eye, and that doesn't affect your vision at all. And I'm like, yeah, cool, perfect, done. And then I related that back to like, if you understand your customers and their problems, like you can also come up with these little add-on offers.
100%.
AI's not going to the doctor, So
and I think what's really interesting too is like it would be hard for, I think, either of us, even though like we are content creators, to like look at 2 sentences side by side and be able to identify which one was which. But if it came down to like in the wild, looking at those 2 things and one of those influencing a purchase decision, I think the one that does that would be the human written one, because it would be written from a point of empathy or sympathy or whatever, just to whatever extent, versus the robot one can't do that yet. Maybe it can't do it ever.
Right. And that's something that Sean Hesketh of WP 101 and 101 videos has talked about. Like, when we were making videos together, he would talk about this attention to detail and like syncing up the background music, so that like when you do something, like the crescendo of the background music matches that, or when you say click, like then the click happens, because people might not be able to verbalize why something seems off, but they'll know. It'll be like kind of instinct, like this doesn't feel right. So those little attentions to details, right? Like AI can't do that yet. Hopefully never, right? I'm a technologist, but I don't want that. Awesome. So writing for humans, appealing to the person, the empathy, being thoughtful in your word choice and things like that. Writing for robots, appealing to search engines and maybe some of these AI tools. Then you put it all together. How do you write content that works for both humans and robots? I assume is what that is.
Yeah, a lot of it is kind of like building out your own style guide, like taking some of these lessons and some of these thoughts and like how can you then apply it to your own brand. And so it gets into like it's also kind of tangentially related to like social media style and like how does that differ from like long form content, like what things are the same, what things are different. And then I share a couple examples of both social media and like written brand style guides that people can also consult to, again, just as like a reference to build their own.
Nice. And so with that, let's talk a little bit about, I looked through the book. I didn't read it cover to cover yet, but it is on my Kindle ready to go. But chapter 11 is the one that really stood out for me. That's in part 2, writing for robots. Though I suspect there's good advice for, I know there is for humans and robots here. How to write compelling SEO titles and page titles. And what my favorite part of this chapter was kind of headline formulas, right? If a keen observer of how I built.it might have noticed that any of my episodes from like 2018 and before were formatted like episode 132, guest name and company name.
Sure.
But I recently I created a spreadsheet of all of those. I came up with new titles and my VA went in and updated all of those titles.
That's awesome.
And so, yeah. And because episode whatever, name and whatever is like not a compelling headline, whereas like how to deal with negative reviews on your product with Jason Coleman, like that is a compelling headline. So
totally.
What's your advice for writing a good headline, I guess, from the robot perspective and from the human perspective?
Totally. Okay, let's start with the human one. So there's like a stat, a fact, an example, whatever you want to call it, that has stuck with me pretty much since I read about it. And it's an example from Buffer. And so what they do is whenever they're trying to determine what the best headline for an article, the article title should be, they'll tweet different versions of it. And so they'll use that as the tweet copy. And then they just dig into the analytics on that, what got the most impressions, click-throughs, whatever. And then that ends up becoming the title of their article. So I think that's so great because it ultimately doesn't matter how good you think the title is, right? Like you might think that you have like such a winner, just like perfect, whatever. But obviously if nobody ever clicks through and reads what it corresponds to, then the title did not do its job.
Right.
So,
right.
So I think their tip is just great because it then involves the end reader and it's real data. It's, sharing it with your audience and seeing what performs. So that's my favorite human example.
So real quick on that, right? So they'll tweet the headline, I assume, with a link, right? Because I feel like just the headline is like feels like a non sequitur, right? Like
right.
20 ways to increase engagement. What are they? Yeah, cool.
Exactly.
So they're kind of like A/B testing headline. So they must pick one, right? And then they kind of A/B test on Twitter. That's cool.
Exactly. Yep. And then as far as like robots, again, it really comes down to eventually how it influences the human. But I think a good way to judge how the robots are just, processing your content is to definitely, if you don't already, have Google Search Console installed on your website and have it gathering data. And then they have this search results report where you can see the clicks and impressions associated with the different keywords that you're ranking for. And so that, I guess it's not so much about titles, but more so just what is ranking, you know, like what you are effectively ranking for, and the words that people are using to find you. And so I think that that's an important insight from the robot side, but to apply to the end reader.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, right? Because, you said like it really still comes down to how it influences the human, because the robots, I mean, Google specifically, right? They are part of their page rank is what people are clicking on and recommending, right? So
Exactly.
You can have the most factually correct article, but if it's like, if
boring.
it's just called like whatever, yeah, like a treaty on headlines or whatever, like nobody's going to click on that.
Right.
And you also in this chapter mention, so actually you mentioned Google Search Console. Are there any other, I've been on a quest for a good keyword research tool lately. Full disclosure, Ahrefs was a sponsor of this show. And I use their like free thing, but they don't accept American Express as I record this. And that's like where I run all of my business expenses through. And I get like unreasonably mad when somebody doesn't accept that. So
there's a lot of people that don't, for sure. I have one for my like personal credit card, and I always feel bad when I bring it to like a small business. So I'm like, I guess I'll use my other card. But if it's like Dunkin' Donuts or whatever, I'm like, you guys can take the hit.
Yeah. In my opinion, if you have an enterprise level plan, like you should probably accept Amex, right? Like, but that's not, again, full disclosure, that's not like a knock on the tool or anything, but that is, I try to keep my books as clean and run all of my expenses through Amex. So, what are you using these days for keyword research?
I will say mostly Ahrefs, but there are some really awesome free tools that work within the SERP, the search engine results page of whatever keywords you want more information about. Keywords Everywhere, great Chrome extension. I believe they have a Firefox extension as well. And it just kind of adds data like on the sidebar of whatever SERP you're searching for. And then on a similar note, Keyword Surfer, which is Surfer SEOs, I think they just call themselves Surfer now. Same sort of idea. And then I think they have some like additional insights that you wouldn't get just from Keywords Everywhere. They've kind of opened their tool up a bit, kind of like Ahrefs has, where they have, some free versions or free features. And I do talk about both of those in the book. I'm trying to remember which chapter that was. It's gotta be, I'm trying to remember. It's definitely in this humans and robots section, I would say. Nice.
This reminds me of the index process. Your book doesn't have an index probably, right? Because you're self-published. I asked my editor, I'm like, oh, so how do you automate creating the index? And they're like, we don't. Someone reads the book and then decides what the important words to include in the index are. I'm like, what?
Yes,
that sounds like the worst job in the world to me.
Yeah, I thought about it, but I was like, I don't know. There could definitely be a benefit to that, but I feel like maybe the book's not long enough, or it kind of already has. It's kind of organized in a way where you should find it where you expect it.
Right, and I mean, especially today, if you get the digital copy, you don't need the index, right? You can just search for the word.
This is true.
So I just thought that was really interesting. Cool. So thanks for those recommendations. I'll probably just stop being a turd and use a different card for Ahrefs because it is a really good tool.
I will
yeah.
say, I don't know if they're still doing this, but they had an offer where if you donated to a cause that's helping the situation in Ukraine, they had like a certain list, but they offered to match whatever you spent on that. And so the Blacksmith are not April. What's before April? March.
Yeah.
I'm already getting lost in this year.
One of these months.
One of the months that happened this year already. Our Blacksmith donation recipient was United Help Ukraine. And then like 2 days later, they're like, oh, we're doing this thing. And I think it's because a lot of people who work at Ahrefs are based in Ukraine. So they may still be doing that.
This episode is brought to you by LearnDash. Look, I've been making courses for a long time. I've taught at the college level, and I've created curriculums for several different organizations, including Udemy, Sessions College, and LinkedIn Learning. When I create my own courses, there's no better option than LearnDash. LearnDash combines cutting-edge e-learning tools with WordPress. They're trusted to power learning programs for major universities, small to mid-sized companies, startups, and creators worldwide. What makes LearnDash so great is it was created by and is run by people who deeply understand online learning and adds features that are truly helpful for independent course creators. I love the user experience. And now you can import Vimeo and YouTube playlists and have a course created automatically in seconds. I trust LearnDash to run my courses and membership, and you should too. Learn more at howibuilt.it/LearnDash. And then I'll just throw one more tool in the ring here, which is like it's YouTube specific, but it's been hugely helpful for me. I'm planning this series on YouTube, which hopefully is out by the time this episode comes out. But is TubeBuddy. It's a Chrome extension, and it kind of works right alongside YouTube, right? So you go to a video, it gives you all the stats and the keyword ranking, but there's also a keyword research tool built into it. And so that was really helpful. Like I would search like Stream Deck and like it wouldn't really, they're like, this is okay. But then I'm like Stream Deck pedal and they're like, yeah, make content about that. Awesome. So we have the human and robot aspect of headlines. What's your approach to writing a headline? Do I've heard like write 25 headlines and then see which ones you like best. Is that good? Is that good advice? Do you do research first? Do you A/B test?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, I like to think about headlines after the article's written. And I don't know if that's right or ideal or whatever, but it's hard for me to conceptualize what the title should be without having the content. As far as like help coming up with options, because I do think that there is merit to coming up with, say, 10 examples and then narrowing that list. A couple of things that I mentioned in the book beyond those headline generation tools are some like headline analysis tools. So you could take those formulas and do 5 or 10 headlines or something like that, and then run them through these analysis tools, which take them from different perspectives. Like one of them's from sort of like the emotional analysis, which ultimately that's kind of like that human reader you're trying to reach. They're definitely thinking with their emotions when they're reacting to what content they want to read based on the headline. Also, CoSchedule has a really great analysis tool that probably has the most highest level of detail in terms of like, you're using emotional words, or, this is like the breakdown of common versus uncommon words, which you want to think about because you want to appeal to your target audience. And like, are they very sophisticated in the way that they talk, or, is it closer to like the average 8th grade level of reading? And then Share Through has another tool that's very similar to the co-schedule one that, again, just helps break it down by different aspects. And then what I like about them is they give some really specific suggestions for what to think about to tweak it.
That's awesome. The co-schedule, gosh, I forgot the co-schedule tool exists, but I use that for a lot, especially after Nate Ellering was with the company and came on the show a long time ago. And I think he mentioned it and I was like, yes, I'm going to use this all the time. And I did, and then I stopped. But that's really interesting. There's a lot of really good resources here. Now we're coming up on time. This has been such a great conversation. If people want to buy your book, like I said, as this episode comes out, it's available for pre-order. When does it come out and where can they order it?
Sure. So it'll be on Amazon for at least the first 90 days, taking advantage of that Kindle Select whatever thing they do.
Nice.
It comes out July 18th. So right now it's available for pre-order as a Kindle. And then on July 18th, the print version will be available. I did not know that before starting this process, that if you do their publishing for the print book, you can't do pre-orders for it.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's probably because like the order comes in and then a robot sends it to the printing press and the printer prints it and then it gets shipped out all automatically. If you pre-order it, it'll just be like that conveyor belt that gets backed up, you know? That's just like a bunch of books with nowhere to go. That is really interesting. I didn't realize that either.
Yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah. Cool. Well, my advice would be, folks, to pre-order the Kindle version, and then if you really want the print version, buy it on July 18th.
There you go.
Awesome, Maddy. I like to ask, do you have any trade secrets for us? Do you have any trade secrets for us?
Should I focus it on publishing or writing for humans and robots?
Dealer's choice. What's your pick your favorite one? Yeah.
Maybe we'll focus it on publishing just because it's so top of mind. But yeah. I think it's important to realize that if you do want to self-publish, it is an incredible amount of work. It's worth it because you get creative control and you can really make it what you want. You can put in the level of effort that you have, you know. The other important thing I think to note is the writing, the publishing, the formatting, the book cover, like all those details is like half of it. And then the promotion is the other half of it. So don't think that you're done just because the book is done. That's about 50% of the process.
Yeah. And I'll just echo, like, that is also the same for publishers. Like they want to know how you're going to promote the book too. Right. So that's not just a self-publishing thing. If you want to write a book, you got to be willing to promote it. What a great trade secret. And it's a perfect trade secret because we're going to talk more about that in Build Something More, which is only available to members of the Creator Crew. You can sign up over at howibuilt.it/272. It's $50 a year. That's less than $5 a month. I'm certain that's less than the coffee I'm drinking. Maddy, is it less than the beverage that you're currently drinking? I feel like you got that from somewhere. Oh, that's just your own water cup. Yeah.
Well, but it's matcha from Matcha Bar, which is not inexpensive, but it probably is just a teeny bit less expensive than going to Starbucks.
So see that? And my coffee from Starbucks was like $6 the other day. So $50 a year over at howibuilt.it/272. Maddy, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you to everybody listening. I appreciate it. Thanks to our sponsors for this episode, Stellar WP, actually LearnDash by Stellar WP, Text Expander, and Nexus. Until next time, get out there and build something.